All right. Let me send out Discord. There we go. Okay. Sweet. All right. Let me. That's actually fine. Okay. Yo, what's up, CDOM? How's it going? First, you are the first person here. Welcome. I forget what it is. Is it this one? Yeah, this is the view that I normally have, I think. Okay. Let me increase this size here a little bit. Preparing to pay rent before court fees apply? What did you do? Right, so I think where we left off was I basically had... So I've got like the entity component thing set up. And I've got the ability to send and receive event notifications. But I also set up this complex condition stuff. I guess I don't need that. Okay. Cool. But the events don't actually have anything in them. We're not actually sending any data. We're basically sending empty objects. So let me do a little bit of a search from all of my Todos. And then we can, yeah, so basically all of these don't have any data in them, so we got to figure that out. Value change event is like a parent to the changed event and the change request event. So let's actually just work on the two child events first, and then if they have any similarities, we can abstract that out into this parent. So let's do this one first. Thanks to a roommate that paid late their part is not like I can hand out $1,000 just because. Oof, yeah. That sucks. Yeah, it does feel like rent is pretty expensive too nowadays. What did I... Okay, so value changed event. So this is going to be the event that gets sent out when a value actually changes. So I think the first thing... We're going to need a couple of pieces of information here, I think. So first things first is we're going to need the actual value that's being changed, which everything is just going to be at a value provider. So we're actually just going to say value provider. And we don't actually have a base class here, because this is typed. Okay, so in that case, let's go like public class value provider. We're making a parent class here. And we'll actually give it an owner, so we can move this up here. Grab you. put you over there. And then we can actually say this is going to extend value provider. Oh, I actually should not have removed it from the parameter list here. That way I can actually give it to the base class. Okay. Why is it getting mad at me here? Make field read only. Well, it doesn't matter. It's fine. Why did I not make this public? I don't know why I did not make this public. Let's just... We'll do that for now. Maybe I can go back and change what is and is not public at a later date. If I want to like limit what can and cannot be accessed, but for now this is fine. So let's go back to the changed event. So we want some value provider. We don't really know what value is being provided or the type of value that's being provided, but we know we have some value that's changing. We can just name it value provider as well. So then at this point, the value has already changed, right? This is the event that we're sending out after the value changes. So it would probably be useful information to know what the value used to be before it changed, right? Obviously now we have the value, so we can get the current value. But we would like to know what it used to be, and I'm wondering if it's actually better to do it a different way. So rather than the value provider having this parent, just hit undo on all that. Maybe this value changed event should be inherited, so we can have like a type here. I can just get rid of this stuff, and then this is going to extend that. Okay. So we need some like non-generic type so that we can easily pass this through all of our stuff. Right. Maybe it would help to pull up that diagram that I made a while ago. Composition hierarchy. This guy. Right, because we want to send events. So the value provider is what's going to be sending the events, and it's going to basically send it up to the component, up to the entity, up to the dungeon, and then the dungeon is going to iterate through all of the entities and make sure that the event gets sent to all of them. Then the entities are going to iterate through all of their components, and so the event's going to get sent out to all of those, and then the effect, and so on. So that's why we need this sort of generic version, so that no matter what data type is being changed, we can always send an event. So we've got that. Now let's have like previous value here. So we know what the current value is because we have its value provider. We also know like what the owner of the value is, right? Because this value provider class has this owner. And of course a component also has an owner, and an entity also has an owner. So we can like, given just the value provider, we can sort of work our way up through the tree if we need to access that. Say for example, we had some kind of effect that was like, every time the player takes damage, deal 1 damage to every enemy on the floor above the player, right? Something weird, some weird mechanic like that. Then we would obviously need to access we would need to go up a couple layers in this composition hierarchy in order to accomplish that. And so we can do that just through the value provider. Okay. Is there anything else we need? I think it's probably beneficial to also throw the original value change request event. I don't know how useful this is actually going to be, but I'm just thinking of like every single bit of information that we can provide, we probably should. Excuse me. So like again, at this point, the value has already changed. And so presumably we've already sent a value change request because that happens first, right? So we send out the value change request event. We do what we need to change the value, and then we send out this event. So we should already have this information. And then I think the only other bit of information that we would need is whatever gets returned from sending out the change request event. So we can see here, if we try and change a value being provided by the value provider, we request a value change, and that gets resolved. So that just calls this function, right? Which creates a new value change request event, and it sends it out to everything. And then it resolves whatever needed to be resolved, right? It applies all these modifiers to the value that we're trying to change it to, and we get the completed thing. Now, we could have an item in the game that is something to the effect of every time incoming damage gets negated, heal 1 health, something like that. That requirement of like every time incoming damage is negated, that requires knowledge of this value change modifier, right? Because I'll bring up the same example that I've been bringing up. Let's say the player has a shield, and the shield has an effect that's something like, if the incoming damage is 5 or less, reduce it to 0. Essentially negate it, right? And then we have like a totem item. So we have a shield and a totem item. The totem item says every time incoming damage gets reduced to 0, heal 1 health, right? So what would happen is if we take, let's say, 5 damage, the shield, so we would send a value change request, right? We would request this value change, and we would say, okay, whatever the current player's health is, we want to change that value to 5 less than it currently is. The shield would receive that event, and it would see, okay, the player's health is about to be changed to 5 less than it normally would be, or than it currently is. So I am going to return a value change modifier that says, actually, don't change the player's health at all. Keep it what it is. The totem would need some way of knowing that the shield had returned that modifier. Right? Because otherwise there's no way for that totem to know that the incoming damage got reduced to 0. So, all of that is to say that along with the value change request event, we also need to send along the list of value change modifiers that actually got applied. So, I believe this is just, it's just an IEnumerable of value change modifier. So we can do this. Right, and it's giving me all these squiggles that I'll deal with here. I'll need a couple of lines here, so we can say let's just grab all of that, shove it into here. It's gonna be annoying with aligning everything. Okay, we don't need that. We don't need semicolons, we need commas. And let's make these the right case. Yo, what's up, literate? How's it going? So now I can say equals value provider equals previous value equals value change request event equals value change modifiers. Don't do that. Okay. So that should be all of the information that we need to send in the value changed event. Not a single soul is here because it's not Will You Snail. CDOM is here. CDOM only ever shows up when I'm doing programming stuff. Different audiences. But yeah, Will You Snail is probably what gets me the most views. Okay, so the other thing that we should do is the change request event. Here we go. So this is like before a value actually gets changed, we're trying to request, we're sending out a request for the value to change, and we need to see if we want to apply any modifiers. So what information would we need to provide to something that wants to react to us attempting to change value? I think, again, we would have to give it a value provider. So I'm going to do a very similar thing here. Value provider, where we make a parent class here. We can extend that, and we can say, no, don't do that. T value, there we go. Okay. Have you seen the Amazing Digital Circus episode 7? The beach episode? I have seen that. Whew. I watched it yesterday. I was a little bit hopeful. And then, yeah, some stuff happened. It does seem like progress, though. For a while there, it genuinely seemed like they were just gonna, like, no progress was gonna be made at all. They were just gonna be stuck forever. And they, like, you know, it didn't exactly happen the way that I thought it would, but I feel like there's a little bit of progress being made. No way you fell for the NPC? I didn't fall for it. I just said I had hope. I was hopeful, all right? What was the other thing that we need to give? Do we need to give anything? Oh, okay, yeah. So this is like the current value, but we haven't changed it yet, so we still need to provide what the new value should be. So we'll give that. And then I think that's it, actually. Because again, you can access basically everything else that you would need from the value provider itself. So let's do that. Excuse me. Bro. All right. Value provider, T value. New value, And then we can assign these equals, that's not where I put my mouse, thank you, equals value provider equals new value. Hello? What just happened? New value. Okay, there we go. There's an insane secret in Kinger's pillow fort. There's something going on with Kinger. Right, because that whole adventure, they were like insistent that Kinger had no part in it. And then it seemed like at the very end, Kane got kind of nervous when Kinger was talking about some stuff. Right, like he brought up the first abstraction, I think. And it seems like the other characters are kind of catching on. It seems like the other characters are finally figuring out that, hey, Kinger might actually know something. Which, I'm not surprised. I gotta figure something was going on with him, but I'm a little bit surprised that none of the characters like tried to pursue that any further. You know? Like in one of the previous episodes, I don't remember which one, but like Pomni and Kinger had that like moment where Kinger gave her like some pretty important advice, right? I'm surprised they didn't pursue that any further. And they were just like, oh yeah, Kinger just sometimes gets his shit together. And then he's perfectly fine. Like, you're not a little bit curious about how that works? You know? I think that's it, right? Okay, so then I think the only thing in common really is the value provider. I mean, there is this like T value thing, but wait, do we actually like use these separately? Kinda, yeah. Okay. Yeah, so let's just use the value provider here. Let's go into the parent. So this value changed event and the value change request event are both children of this thing. And they both have value providers. So let's do this. And then I can say T value and this extends value change event. Excuse me. Value provider T value. Value provider. Okay. So now in the value change request event, we don't have to have this separate thing. And yeah, okay. So instead of actually, I might be rethinking some of this. Where do we use this? Where do we use the parent? In isMet. Right, because we don't care about what kind of event it is. Okay. Sure. So then I guess, yeah, I just don't abstract here. I don't know if that makes sense, but I don't think it doesn't make sense. Does that make sense? I think it's fine. Alright, where are my Totos? Alright, I just got this one. Value change modifier. I don't even know if I need to do anything here. Right, because these are going to be like... These are basically going to be defined by the quote-unquote user. So I think this just needs to like exist. It doesn't have to have anything in it yet. And then it can just be extended by other people, aka me later. There's like an item at 23, bottom middle. I might look at it later. I'm not going to pull it up right now. And then the only other two do. Okay, so this. So a condition. Right, so like an effect can only ever have one condition. So if for whatever reason the effect already has a condition, then we throw. The other way of going about this is already having the condition defined. That kind of goes against everything else though. Maybe we just throw like an exception and we don't like create a custom exception or anything. We can just give it a message like effect already has a condition, something like that. It's super interesting. Like, I kind of assumed, maybe that's not the right way to phrase it. I have a theory that Kinger is like legitimately a programmer of the Digital Circus, and maybe there's some bit of lore that I'm missing that like proves that he's not. But I don't think that that adventure was that far off from the truth. And again, maybe that's just me stretching a little bit, but that's at least what I like to think. It does seem like he knows a little bit more than what you could potentially know having just been in the circus, right? There's got to be some additional information that he has that nobody else has access to. I don't know that I like the fact that this condition is abstract, but maybe it's okay. Maybe it's fine. I'm so intrigued by the ending of the series. I mean, they've still got at least one more episode, right? Or was that the end of it? Can't figure out how they will end it? Okay. Oh, two more. Why are they ending on episode 9? I mean, I guess if it makes sense to end it at 9 episodes, but if it makes sense, it makes sense, you know? Okay. I'm gonna add a new project to the solution. Where is that option? Add new project. Yeah, just make it a console app. Let's call it, what did I call this one? Dungeon game test. Not text, test. There we go. I'll check that one. Okay. They needed that probably to fully flesh it out. Yeah, that's fair. Because it wasn't Murder Drones like 8 episodes? I don't know what else they've done, but I did just watch that recently. Why is this internal? That's weird. Anyway, so can I just say this? Or do I need some special thing here? I might need some special reference. What's the game about? It is a roguelike. Surprise, surprise. Let me pull up this guy. So, have you ever played Pokemon Mystery Dungeon? It is highly based on that. Or I guess inspired by that is a better way to put that. But it's like a 2D top-down dungeon crawler. In the Pokemon game, you play as a Pokemon. In this one, you're gonna play as a human. So it's like it doesn't have anything to do with the Pokemon universe, but the gameplay is very similar. And it's all based on a grid, and you basically take turns doing stuff. So it could be like moving one tile, using a Pokemon's move, eating an item, something like that. It's all turn-based. So that's the idea. Except this is a roguelike. Because it's an indie game, it has to be a roguelike, obviously. The main thing that I'm trying to go for is... So you know how, like, typical roguelikes have like a pool of items that could potentially show up in any given run? So like Balatro, for example, there are a bunch of different Jokers, and they've got different rarities, so they have different percentage chances of showing up, but they're all predefined. And they randomly show up in your run, and you can pick them. But all of them are there. There's, I don't know how many, a couple hundred, I think. I don't know. What I want to try to do is, instead of having a predefined pool of items, all of the items and their effects are randomly generated. So I'm not just having a giant pool of items and then randomly picking from it, I'm randomly generating the pool itself. Now, that has all kinds of balancing issues that I'm going to deal with later, but I want to figure out if it's technically possible. So that's what we're doing here. We're building up the framework, setting the scaffolding to do that. And now I have to figure out how to actually like use this project, because I forgot how to put that together. Help me out here. I'm gonna search for it. What am I trying to do? Import other project in solution. Use a class. add project reference. Add project reference. This one. Okay. And does that work? It looks like it does. It wants me to put it up here. Okay, that's fine. So now if I were to say var dungeon equals a new dungeon, I could do that, right? And then this takes me to here. Nice. Cool. All right. Can I close other tabs? Yeah, okay. Let's clean this up a little bit. Okay, so I can make a dungeon. Now I would like to create an entity for that dungeon. Let's call it a player. New entity. And then I would have to provide it an owner of dungeon. So that should automatically add it to this dungeon. And then if I wanted to add a component to the player, test component, new component, and I just have to give it the player. Okay, I have to give it a couple of different things. So I have to provide it with a function. And I forget exactly what this function needs to do. So it needs to return, right, okay. Let me just call it thing. And then it needs to return this. It needs to return basically a list of value change modifiers. And it needs to take as parameters a component and a value change request event. Why is he getting mad at me? Oh, because, okay, yeah, sure. Return just an empty thing for now. And then let's put all of this stuff on new lines to make it a little bit easier to read. Okay, get value change modifiers is what I called it. Get value change modifiers. Okay, so the idea, or at least the main idea behind the component is that you wouldn't really do it like this, although I'm going to do it like this just for the sake of testing. What you would normally do is you would actually create your own component class. So like, say class location component would extend component, right? Let's go like this. Yeah, generate me a constructor, please. Make it a primary. Okay. And then again, I'm gonna, but whoops, that's not how that works. Put all this stuff on new lines, so it's a little bit easier to see. And then what I can actually do is I could pop this into here. This doesn't need to be static anymore. Why is it formatted like that? I don't know why it's doing that. But the idea is I can get rid of this and just make an owner. Can I do this actually? I don't know that I can. An object reference is required, yeah. If I make it static, it allows me to do that? Oh, I see, I see. Okay, I might have to reorganize this a little bit. What I might do is just say this needs to be abstract, and then instead of passing in this function, we can just say public abstract this, which returns list of modifiers, and it takes in these guys. Component value change request event. Okay. Yeah, so now we can get rid of this, and we can get rid of this, and we can get rid of this. Make this a little bit easier. Okay, so now you only have to give a component an owner, but it's an abstract class, so you have to extend it. And then you also would have to define this function. So it's a little bit different of a workflow, but I think it's better. And then you don't actually need to be provided with a component because, well, this, you're working inside the context of a component already, so you don't really need it. And then, yeah, I don't need to pass this in. Whoops. Can just do that. Okay, that makes things a little bit easier. I remember considering making this abstract before, and I don't remember why I decided not to do that. But this definitely should be abstract. So. That being said, let's yeet everything inside there. And then, yeah, implement me the abstract class, please. And then we can just say return nothing for now because it doesn't actually need to do anything. I'm actually wondering if I should just do that by default. We can say instead of making this abstract, we can make it virtual. And then we can say that this just returns an empty collection. And that way I'm not like forced to do this. I'm not forced to define that function if I don't want to. I think that makes sense. So then what we can do is we have this location component. We can say public value provider of type. Let's just say an integer, and this will be the x coordinate. And then we do the same thing, and that can be, this is going to be a flat thing, so we'll say z instead of y. And we can just set that equal to, can we do that? I don't think we can actually. I think we do have to define a constructor here. That way we have access to the this reference. So let's do it this way. Pass it in. Yeah, base owner. Can get rid of this stuff up here. So I can say x is equal to a new value provider, and we'll just give it the value of 0. What else do I need? I need an owner and initial value. An initial value. And then a modifier resolution thing. So let's say, we can probably define this outside the class. We can just say static int resolve value. What did I call it? Value change. Resolve value change. Solve value change. Okay. What exactly does this need to take in? It needs to take in an integer and a list of modifiers. Okay, sure. Int new value and a list of value change modifiers. And then we can just return new value, because we don't actually want to modify the value right now because we haven't defined any of that stuff yet. So we'll just say x is equal to that, z is equal to this. Actually, we can pass those in as parameters. X int z. So this will be x, this will be z. Okay. So now we've created our location component, which has these two x and z values. So now I can say player location component equals a new location component, and we can give it the player, and then we can just spawn the player at 0, 0. Right? So this is the basic idea. So you can define custom components, and you can attach them to entities that you create. That's sort of the workflow that we're aiming for here. Now, this resolve value change function is basically like, okay, if we ever want to change the value of x, right? Let's say player location component dot x dot. We want to try and change its value to, let's just say 5, right? What this is actually going to do is it's going to send out an event to everything inside of this dungeon, and anything inside of this dungeon is allowed to apply a modifier, right? That's what this value change modifier is. And so it can basically look at this, okay, so we're trying to change the x value to 5, but we might not actually want to do that, right? There might be an enemy in the dungeon that has like a force field around them, and you're not actually allowed to move closer to them, right? So we can request that we want to change the x coordinate, but maybe that enemy doesn't actually allow us to do that. So we can apply a modifier to that value change request and say, hey, we don't actually want to move the player, right? So that's what this function is for. And after that happens, so after all the modifiers get applied, then it'll actually update the value of x, and it'll send a second event to everything in the dungeon that then says, hey, this value has changed. You can do something in response, right? So again, if we had an item, if the player has an item that's like every time you take damage, heal 1 health, right? So we would basically set up an effect that listens for the player's health changing, and then every time it goes down, you could increase it by 1 again, right? Something like that. So, we can have this location component. Let's, for the sake of simplicity, actually, let's make this a health component. Maybe that's actually not terribly simple. I don't know. Whoops, if I can spell it right. Let's make this a health component. And we're not actually going to have a maximum health. We're just going to have health. And we're just going to say it's going to start at 100. And it's got no maximum. You can do whatever you want. It could be negative if you want to. Who's to say? It's just some value here. So now let's say I want I don't know. Let's just say like heal on damage component. So I'm actually gonna like implement that thing that I just mentioned, which was anytime the entity takes damage, it's gonna increase its health by 1, right? So we can say this is now a health component. Player health component. And then we'll simulate taking damage by saying player health component dot health -5. Oh, it's dot value. Okay. Something like this. This is maybe a bit wordy, so we can maybe add some functionality to make this a little bit easier and not like so verbose, but we can do that later. I just want to test this sort of proof of concept thing, right? So what we would want to do is we would actually want to say public effect heal on damage effect. Can say heal on damage effect is going to be a new effect. And what exactly do we need to provide an effect? Quite a few things. So we're going to need to provide the current component. We need a function. Say public bool should proc, should affect proc, let's say. We can pass that in. What exactly does this need to do? Return a Boolean, and it takes in an effect and a value change event. Okay. Effect, value change event. Why does this need to take in an effect? Should proc. I'm kind of rethinking the way that I want to do this. So I made this abstract. This does need to be abstract because it could potentially have state, right? In this case, where we have to give it a value provider. Like, technically, an effect does not need to be abstract. It's just a little bit weird the way that I'm doing this. I think this is fine though. So we'll just say value change event is so we're trying to see if the player has just taken damage. So if it's value changed event of type integer, and let's not overcomplicate this first. Let's just say, okay, if that is the case, so if the event that's being sent out is some integer has just been changed, then I want to test to see if the value that's been changed is the player's health, right? Or like, is the current entity's health. So I can say, let's say owner dot components dot contains the value changed event dot value provider. No, if it contains a health component, right? So I'm going to say owner dot components. Is there like a try get dot find first? Returns the first elements of a sequence. Might just add that as a convenience thing. Let's go into entity and say public bool try get component t component where t component extends component. We can say, what's the syntax here? Out t component. Component? Is that it? That might be it. Yo, what's up, Glitch? How's it going? Just implemented the hardcore way, right? Component. Components. Is this a good way of doing this? I don't know. Something like this, then I can say component equals C, return true. Oop. Give me just C. Yeah, cast it, and then if nothing, return false. Okay. There's probably a better way of doing this. Right, I gotta add the I forget what it is. Maybe know when. That's what it is. Okay. Why is this still getting mad at me? But I said it might be null. Is that not how this works? Maybe null when false out thing. Oh, I have to say default, really? Ugh. Component equals default. Okay. There we go. All right. So, like, of course, this is just going to return the first instance. So, like, if you have, let's say, multiple health components for whatever reason, it's only going to return the first one. I don't really know why you would do that, but yeah, just maybe a little bit of a caveat to do that. Okay, so glitch, to try and catch you up here, I have implemented most of the basic things that I need for this kind of a framework. So I've set up a new project with just this one file where I'm trying to actually use the framework that we've set up. So you can create a dungeon, you can create an entity, which I've just named the player, and put it in the dungeon. You can give it a component. So in this case, I've made a health component. So in order to make the health component, it's just a new class, and you can give it this value provider that's health. And what this value provider will allow you to do is you can just say, if I wanted to like lower the player's health by 5, this would be how I would do that, right? Player health component dot health dot change value to whatever the current health is -5. Now, like I said earlier, that's a little bit verbose, and we can change that later. But what this is going to do is it is going to automatically send out to everything in the dungeon a change request being like, hey, the player's health is about to change to this new value. Here's your chance to either modify what's about to happen, or you can react to it in some way. And then it's going to apply all of the modifications that happen as a result of that, actually changes the health value, and then it sends out another thing to everything in the dungeon that says, hey, this value just changed. Here's its new value. Here's some additional information about what happened. Here's your opportunity to react to all of that. So that's why I'm using this value provider thing instead of just saying, hey, the player has an integer that's called health. Right? That's what the value provider does. That's what all of this framework has been building up to, essentially. So all I have to do is say this one line, say, hey, I want to change the player's health by 5, and all of that stuff then happens automatically. Everything in the dungeon gets notified that something is about to change. They get a chance to modify it. Then everything gets updated and says, hey, this thing just changed. Now you can react. All of that happens automatically. I've created a new project. It's just to test what we've already created, all right? It's not like a new project. No need to go that far. But okay, so this is just like a very simple component, right? It's just got a single integer. We're not even messing around with maximum health values. We're not messing around with whether or not the health can be 0 or negative. Right, very simple thing. Here I want to implement something a little bit more complicated that says, okay, every time the entity that has this component attached, anytime this entity takes damage, after it takes damage, you want to actually heal 1 health back. So I need this effect. So we're going... I already tested, having a component that has a value provider. Now I'm trying to make a component that has an effect on it. So that is what I was working on when you showed up. I was working on writing this function, which basically just inside of the entity, it iterates through all of the entity's components, compares it to some type that you give it, and it'll return true if it finds that component, and it'll spit it out at you, and if it doesn't find it, then it'll return false. So I can use that to then say if, get rid of those. So this is the should proc effect that I'm attaching to the heal on damage effect. So I've just said, okay, if the value change event that's being sent out, if we're trying to change an integer, then first thing we need to do is we need to say owner.tryGetComponent, the health component, outvar owner health component, right? So if the owner does have a health component, we'll fetch that. And then we need to test to see, and then I'll de-nest all of these in a bit, but I just want to make sure that my logic here is right. So now I want to check to see if the value changed event dot value provider is the exact same thing as the owner health component health. In other words, are we changing an integer value? Does the current owner have a health component? Is the value that was just changed equal to the value in this health component? And if all of that is true, then what I want to do is I want to say owner health component dot health dot change value, owner health component dot health dot value +1, right? Again, I just want to take the current health and increase it by 1. In response, oh, actually, that's the other thing. I need to first check to see if the value changed event dot, if the previous value is strictly greater than the owner's health, right? Because I want to make sure they actually took damage. What I want to do is I want to, listen, I gotta take a little bit of time to think about what I'm doing. All right. I'm working in a bit of a Hadouken right here. So let's de-Hadoukenify it. Basically, we want to say, so if the value that just changed is not an integer, then we do not want to proc the effect. Oh, I'm kind of dumb. This is just the should proc effect. This is not actually the effect itself, or the action. Okay. Let's add more nests. Yeah. Right, so this should just be checking. This should not be checking this at all. Right, so if the value that just got changed is not an integer, just return false. If the owner does not have a health component, then also return false. Now, if the value that just got changed, and I don't know whether or not this should be in should proc effect, or if this should be in here, because I feel like this try get component piece is supposed to be part of the generate target. So I feel like maybe I just want to not do this yet. But I probably should at least check to make sure that the owner has that component. Yeah, this does need to be in the should proc effect. Okay. So then if the value that just got changed is not the player, or not the current entity's health, then return false. Otherwise, you can return true. There we go. Just if true. Just add a bunch of if trues here. There we go. Perfect. The cleanest code you've ever seen. Yeah, simplify me. Convert me. Convert me again. Simplify me. What? What do you mean place statement on the following line? Invert if? Sure. Just... Great, okay. Oh, why did I do that? Simplify. Sure, use expression. Okay. So we don't actually need this. We can just discard it. Let's rename this to irresolved integer change. We could throw that in there. Okay. Okay, so basically this says if... Oh, it threw parentheses around this? Yeah, remove those. I don't know why I did that. Okay, so it says if the value that just got changed is an integer, then it says, okay, if the owner has a health component, now if the value that just got changed is the player's, or not the player, is the owner's health, then you're good to go. Then you are good to actually proc the effect. Okay. What is the other information that this needs? This needs a target generator. So say public value provider of type integer. Generate target. And it needs to take in, it needs to return an object, and it needs to take in an effect and a value change event. Generate target. I don't know if it's gonna recognize this properly because this is not an object, this is a value provider, but it's fine. Can change it later. Okay, so now I kind of want to do this guy. Let's actually make this easier again. Give me this. Say get component. And we will return t value. Nope. Oh, it's just t component. I'm dumb. Then we can return component. Let's rename C to component now that we're not actually like returning this thing. Explicitly cast it, and then we can say return defaults. How does the dictionary deal with not actually finding it? New dictionary. There's probably a better way to get this info, but like, does this operator just I assume it throws an error if the thing is not actually in the container. There's got to be an easier way to search for this. It extends iDictionary. Okay, let's comment all this out. Let's comment all this out. Okay, what happens if I create a new dictionary and then I try and access an element that doesn't exist? Whoops. Configure startup. Should be dungeon game test. Okay. It does throw an error. Okay. good to know. Just say component of type something is not present. In entity. All right, give me a formatable string so that I can say type of T component. Okay. Cool. So if it's there, we get it. If it's not there, we just throw an error. But let me undo this a bajillion times. Okay. But because this should proc effect has already verified that we do in fact have that component, we can just get it. So we can just say return owner dot get component health component dot health. Right, perfect. Okay. So now we need an action. And I'm wondering if it's actually better should this be abstract? Because this feels a little bit weird to be like defining these functions here. But I feel like the only way to make like randomly generated effects is if we do that. So if we have it like this. Right? I mean, maybe not necessarily. Maybe I can just make this abstract and then define these functions as abstract. I think that's okay. So if I just do something like this, right? Then here I can say should proc. Oh wait, I actually want these. Should return a Boolean. And it doesn't need to take in an effect because, again, we've changed the scope to the effect itself. So we just need a value change event. Okay. So I can get rid of this stuff. I can say public abstract. We need to return some object. Generate target. It needs to take any value change event. Generate action. We just need action. Doesn't need to return anything, but it does need to take value change event as well as an object for the target. This can be simplified a little bit here. Okay, so then we don't actually have to pass this into these guys. Cool. And this condition. Let's actually make... Let's do a thing here, say public class empty condition, extend this condition. It does need an owner. I don't actually know if we need if we need to do this explicitly. Yeah, it'll be fine. Okay, so then I can just say extend base. Same thing here. Oops. Extend base. Give it the owner. There we go. Right. So let's implement the isMet thing, and then we can actually just say true, right? Because we're saying this is an empty condition. It doesn't do anything. There is no actual condition here. We can discard the inputs, and it's getting mad at me because they're multiple. I don't like that it doesn't work like that. Where else did we use underscore? We used it somewhere else to discard an input, I think. I'm gonna reorganize all of this anyway. Okay. So now we can say there definitely has to be a condition, but it can be equal to a new empty condition. Maybe that's actually not the greatest way to approach this. Yeah, no, I don't actually like that. I'm not a huge fan of this being nullable. but I think it's just the best way to go about it, given the fact that an effect is only allowed to have one condition here. I think I kind of just have to do that. Okay, so now what we can do is we can create a new class here, heal on damage effect, and that's going to extend effect. And this needs what exactly? Needs a component as an owner. Component. Doesn't need this. Do all of that stuff. So now I can just grab this guy, paste it on here. Get rid of this. Okay, what are my issues here? Owner.tryGet components. There should be owner.owner.tryGet component, because the owner is the component itself, and then the owner of the component is the entity, and then we can try and get a different component from there. Okay. Again, a little bit verbose, but I think it's okay. So then in order to generate a target, we just do this. Why are you violently scrolling me? Please stop. Okay. We could just do this. Except we're not gonna try, we're just gonna get it. Because we can. Let's get the health component dot health itself, because that's really the thing that we want. And then our action is going to be to say, so we have a value provider of type integer. That's what our target is. Then I want to say dot change value to whatever its current value is. So let's expand this out into a real function here. We can say var health value provider equals the target casted as a value provider. Oops. As an integer value provider, and then we can say health value provider dot change value, and what we want to change it to is the health value provider dot value +1. Okay. Generate target, we've already got that. Okay. We can turn this into a primary constructor. Cleans it up a little bit. So then here, all we would have to do is say, get rid of all this garbage. We can just say equals heal on damage effect. And just do that. It wants me to simplify it. Okay, fair enough. It wants me to simplify this one too. Okay. So now this should work. Just to like recap what I've done here. So I have created a custom component that I've called health component. And the only thing that it does is it contains this value provider with health. Right? It's an integer with some health. And its default value is 100. And this resolve integer change currently doesn't do anything, right? In theory, what it's supposed to do is whenever we try and change the health value, it's supposed to apply some modifiers to that process, but we currently don't care yet, so we're not actually doing anything. So, like, for example, the classic, right? If we have a shield that says if you're taking 5 damage, reduce it to 0, and if you have a piece of armor that says halve the amount of incoming damage, right, depending on the order that those two proc in, it could change the outcome. So instead of doing that, or instead of like arbitrarily choosing an order, we just have them return a modifier, and then we can take, okay, we can say, okay, here's the value that we want, or like here's the value that we're trying to change it to, here are all the modifiers that have been applied. Figure out what the new value should actually be considering those modifiers, right? So again, right now we're not actually doing anything with the modifiers, so we're just returning the same value. But that's all part of this value provider here. So we've got this custom health component. So we're creating a new dungeon, we're creating a player entity and putting it inside of the dungeon, and then we're adding this health component to the player. So I've also created this heal on damage effect component, or heal on damage component that contains the heal on damage effect. And the heal on damage effect, this should proc. It tests to see if the value that just changed is an integer, and if the owning component, or if the owning entity has a health component, and the value that just got changed is the same value that's being provided by the health component, then go ahead and proc this effect. Target generator grabs the actual value provider from the health component of the owning entity. And then the actual action that happens is, so we recast the target to be a value provider, because that's the actual type that it is. And then we change it to be increased by 1. So that's the heal on damage effect. So now what I should be able to do is say var player heal on damage component. And I don't actually need a reference to what I'm about to create, but it's going to get mad at me. Unnecessary assignment, because I don't actually use it anywhere, but we've got this going on. So what this should do, so if I've added those two components, I'm going to do a console.writeLine of the player health component .health.value. So we're going to do a little bit of a before and after. So we're going to see what the player's health is before we make any changes. So we've set up the scenario, we're printing out the health. Then we're going to attempt to change the player's health value. We're going to reduce it by 5, and then we're going to see what happens. What should happen is we attempt to reduce the player's health by 5, which actually does happen, which it does occur. But then our heal on damage effect immediately procs, which should then increase the health by 1. Except I've left out a part that I forgot, which is that this needs to make sure that the health that's changing is actually going down. So I'm going to need a condition here. So let's say class is damage, or is taking damage condition. It's going to extend condition. What do we need here? Yeah, implement me. Yeah, give me a constructor. Use primary. Okay. So is the condition met? Basically, I just want to say, so the target, again, we're going to need to cast as a value provider. Then I can take that and say, you know what, let's do a similar thing here. Let's just store that as a value. For health value provider is equal to this guy. Return health value provider. And let's also say value changed event equals, I'm going to cast it as a value changed event. I just want to say, I gotta think, man. I gotta think. Okay, so if the health value provider you know what, do I even need this? Can't I just say value changed event dot oh, this needs to be of type integer, I think. Yeah, dot value provider dot value is less than value changed event dot value dot previous value. Right. Let's change this to took damage condition. So actually, this isn't like specific to any health thing. This is just, let's just say, int reduced excuse me. So if some integer value got reduced, then this returns true. So now what I can do is in the constructor here, give me this. Yo, Professor Leo, thank you for the raid. Welcome in, everybody. Hello. How's it going? How is the stream? Thank you for the follow. What was going on? What were you doing? What was I doing? Oh, right, I need to assign it a condition. Okay, so let's say condition is equal to a new int reduced condition. Was good. Was beginning a tower defense game for a game jam. Nice. How's it coming along? I've always been pretty interested in making a tower defense game. They look fun to make. I've also never participated in a game jam. I feel like it takes me too long to put together an idea. I would be very nervous participating in a game jam. What were you doing? What was I doing? Listen, I get easily distracted. How long is the game jam? Because I know some of them are like, they can be pretty long. Coming along well for something made in like 3 hours. Those was running low on ideas now towards the end of stream. That's very fair. That's very fair. It's 1 week long. Okay. That's still pretty short. I don't know that I would be able to put together a whole game in a week. That seems like a lot. I'm impressed by anybody that can do that. What do I need to give it? I need to give it this. Okay, and then you need to extend base owner. So let me maybe attempt to explain what I'm trying to do here. Because it's a little bit difficult for me to explain. I think I can in 1 week. Let's see. I'm hoping for you. Yeah, it's I've made small games before, but usually they take a little bit longer than even a week. I don't know that I could produce anything in a week. So what I'm trying to do here, has anybody played Pokemon Mystery Dungeon? That is what this project is highly inspired by. It is supposed to be like a 2D top-down grid-based dungeon crawler. It's also turn-based, so you can take turns. And it's also a roguelike, right? The classic. It's an indie game, so it's got to be a roguelike. That's like half of the requirement of being an indie game. The idea, though, is that, so in like your typical roguelike, let's take like Balatro, for example. I'm going to assume you guys are familiar with Balatro. But you've got a bunch of jokers that show up randomly through the run, right? And they've got different rarities, so they have different percentage chances of showing up. But you basically got a bunch of jokers that could potentially show up in a run. What I want to see is even possible is if you could, instead of having a pool of random jokers, or instead of having a pool of jokers that you randomly pick from, you randomize the items themselves. So I've tried to do my best to break down what an effect is into its core components that you could then potentially randomize and then apply to an item. So, you know, you could have... So the thing that I'm trying to test right now, for example, is a sort of heal on damage effect, where anytime a character takes damage, it then heals 1 health. Right, and I'm sort of just hard coding all of this stuff. I haven't implemented any of the randomness yet, but we're gonna get there. I just need to make sure this all works. So I've kind of broken it down into like, okay, so there's this function that tests to see whether the effect should even proc, what the effect should target, and then the actual thing that's like performing the effect, right? The action. So broke down an effect into its core components and trying to see if this makes sense at all. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so we've got this heal on damage effect. I think I've got all of this stuff set up. So the heal on damage effect is inside of this heal on damage component. The heal on damage component I have added to this player. So I've got a new dungeon. I create a new entity that I just call player. I put it in the dungeon. I give it a health component, and I give it a heal on damage component. Now, I'm printing out the value of the player's health. I'm attempting to reduce the health by 5. And then I'm printing out the health value again. So let's see if all of this worked. It did not work. That's okay. So what should have happened is we attempt to reduce the health by 5. So it did properly reduce the health by 5. But what should have happened is it should have attempted to reduce the health by 5. And then this heal on damage effect should have procced. And then increased the health by 1 again. So we should have seen a 96 here instead of a 95. So let's see if we can't log some more stuff to see what happened here. So let's just say output is equal to that, and then we can console write line the output and then return it. Okay, so let's just see if this, first of all, if this function is actually running, and then second of all, if the condition is actually what we expect it to be, which should be true. Okay, and it doesn't print out at all. So the condition is not even being run. Let's figure out whether should proc is returning true. Maybe that's a good place to start. So let's say output is equal to that. Oops, there we go. Let's console write line, write line the output, and then return the output. Okay, again, we should see true. It's returning false twice. Okay. So let's try and break this down then. Because there's multiple conditions that are being tested here. So let's just say part 1 is equal to this. I'm going to comment this out because I kind of like the fact that all of it's together, even though it might be difficult to see. I can say part 2 is equal to this second condition. And then part 3 is equal to this bit here. Okay, so basically what we're doing is we're testing to see, okay, is the value that just got changed an integer? Then we check to see if the entity that currently has this effect on it, does that have a health component? And then we're trying to see if the value that just changed is that health value. And why is it getting mad at me? Oh, I guess. Why did it auto-complete to that? Because I need to do this. Use of unassigned local variable. Okay, I guess it can't figure out that this is correct. Just do it this way, maybe? Why is it getting mad at me? Oh, it is not. Okay. Okay. So now let's just print out part 2 and part 3. Yo, what's up, Cortex? How's it going? And then we can just return part 2 and part 3. Okay, yeah, I'm debugging here. That should be fine. Okay, so what are we gonna see here? We're gonna see absolutely nothing. So that means that this is happening. This is being returned. Or like this is triggering, right? So why is that happening? Value changed event. This is the value. Yeah, that's that. Oh, I know what's going on. Where's my value provider? Here we go. Okay. Yeah, because we didn't actually... I updated the data that needs to be sent through these events, but I didn't actually update these. Okay, so... what does this require? So this requires a value provider, which is just this. It also requires a previous value. So let's say our previous value is equal to value, and then we can throw previous value into there. Excuse me. I am actually just gonna copy paste this stuff into here, because I need access to some of these variables. What in the world just happened here? Okay, that was weird. Don't know why I did that. Okay, what else does this need again? Previous value, a value change request event, which is this guy. And then it also needs the modifiers. There we go. Okay, and let's put all this stuff on new lines. Okay. So then I want to do... yeah, I'm going to need to do basically the same thing up here. Give me this guy. Pop that there. Got a gift basket from work, so that's cool. Nice. Got some homemade baked goods and some candy. Sweet. Is that from your audio engineering gig? That. I know at one point you had multiple jobs. Is that the only one you have now? Okay. So we do need to create this guy, and we need to give it what? A value provider and a new value? Okay. So that's just going to be this and new value. Same thing here. T value, this new value. Currently I only have one stable job. Okay, gotcha. That's pretty cool that they gave you a gift. All right, let me grab this. Put it here. Okay, we don't have... okay, so here we can just say value because we don't need like the previous value, right? Okay, so we are duplicating a little bit of code, but I think this is okay given the context here. because they're laid out slightly differently. And I'm not going to go into why they're like that because it's a little bit lengthy. But let's see if that works now. It does. Okay. Phenomenal. So now I can get rid of all of this stuff, and I can just say return that. Yeah, we can use expression. Okay. Let's also use expression here. Just because I know it's going to get mad at me. If I don't, what's the other thing? Remove unused parameter. No, it needs to be there. Okay, I can remove that console. I can just say return. Okay. Play it again. Perfect. So the health starts at 100. We reduce it by 5, which does actually work. But then, in response to the health being reduced by 5, it then increases by 1 because we have this heal on damage effect applied to the player. Phenomenal. So now, if we just do this a couple more times, let's see what happens. So it should, in theory, like only reduce by 4 every time, despite the fact that we have this -5. And that's exactly what's happening. Perfect. Perfect. Okay. So this is the sort of workflow that I would imagine a quote-unquote user having, right? So you can just create a dungeon, you can create entities, you can attach components to those entities, and each of these components would just basically be their own class that inherit from the base component. Any kind of state would have to be in a value provider, which you would have to give some kind of resolution function to, right? Which in this case we're not doing anything, but in theory you would. Then, if you want an effect, you could also just create a custom effect that extends from effect. Excuse me. And if you want a custom condition, you can also make a custom condition that has its own isMet function here. So I've just hard-coded all of this stuff. If you wanted to, say, create a random effect, what you could do is, because you just have this function here, right, what you could do is have, similarly to what I said before, where you've got, like, in Balatro, you've got a set of predefined jokers that show up during your run. You could have a set of predefined conditions, or like these should proc functions. Actually, the should proc function probably shouldn't be randomized. It's mostly the action that needs to be randomized, and then the target generator and the should proc should be like based on that. But at least the condition and the action can be randomized. Right, so you can just have like a bunch of different actions that could potentially happen. You can randomly pick from that, and then you could, plop it in here. You could also have a set of random conditions, or like a set of predefined conditions, and you could randomly pick from those. So I think that the basic setup is done. And we could move on to like getting more stuff set up. So rather than just having health component, we can have like a location component and a movement component and an interactable component and an inventory component and stuff like that. But I think the basic stuff is all set up. I think this is good. I'm a fan. Because you just have this. Alright, what did I change? I changed a bunch of stuff. Yeah, so I got rid of the complex condition thing there. I made this abstract. Oh right, I added a project reference. I just made that throw an exception, sure. I made the effect abstract. I'm sorry, HTTP headers? Where was this? Huh? What? Why does it think that this is here? It's in the entity class. Oh, this is effect. I'm dumb. Here we go. Okay. There we go. I do need this code analysis so that I can have this maybe null when portion. But okay. Okay, that makes a little bit more sense. And then we updated the value changed event thing. Value change event is just like a class so that we can access some other stuff and pass it around easily. Value change modifier, I haven't messed with intentionally. Made that public, and then just updated this to use the correct events. Okay. And then, oh, that's kind of cool. It doesn't actually track like this guy, like my testing stuff. Maybe it should, but it doesn't. Okay. What should I say? Add event details. Sounds good. Go for it. All right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty good. Again, I can start working on, you know, making some components that I know are definitely going to be used in the game. And then we can start messing around with randomly generating them. The other thing that we could do is, well, I need at least a little bit of some setup. Especially I need like a location component so that things can actually like be in the dungeon. Excuse me. But I think once we have that, we could potentially start looking into graphics. So like I don't know. It's probably just going to be best to use a game engine. I was considering, like, I don't know, having... Yeah, no, it's probably just going to be easier to use a game engine because I don't want to have to deal with, like, asset management, and rendering is just a nightmare. I don't want to mess with any of that. So I'll probably pick a game engine. It's probably going to be Godot, or Godot, however you want to say it. And then we can just shove all of this stuff into some scripts. I don't remember. Does Godot have a separate thread for rendering? Does it have like the main game loop and the rendering in two separate threads? You should choose Scratch as your game engine. Yeah, no, I want people to actually play the game eventually, so probably not. This game has enough diversity in what's happening that it doesn't make sense to not use a game engine. Yeah, I mean, like, if there was a way to, like, easily manage assets and a way to, like, render stuff easily, because that's my big thing, really, is that I just don't want to roll my own renderer. Graphics programming is not something that I'm interested in. But, like, if there was some library that was just, like, super easy to use and I could basically, like, give it a PNG and it would put it on the screen for me, you know, like, that would be good enough in terms of rendering for me, I think, for this game. But the other thing is that I would have to manually, like, worry about loading and unloading those PNGs. So I don't really know that I want to tackle that issue. Like, I could, but I don't know that it's worth it. I'm just worried about, especially something like Godot. And I know I shouldn't be worried about this, but I'm worried about bloat, right? Because Godot has a lot of stuff, has a lot of features, a lot of things that I just don't need. Because, like I said, really the only two things that I'm not going to be doing myself is rendering and asset management. But, you know, Godot's got this whole custom language that they use, which I don't really care to have the language interpreter in my game because I'm not going to be using it. They've got, like, all these predefined node types that I don't need. You know, there's just a lot that I'm not going to use, and I don't actually know if it's smart enough to cut that out of the final build. Which, again, isn't a huge deal because it's probably negligible in the grand scheme of things, but if I could find some easy way of both rendering stuff and managing assets, then I don't think I would need a game engine. Because, like, this effectively is the game engine, right? Like, this is kind of enough. I mean, I got to take user input and stuff like that, and, like, save files and whatever, but that stuff is, I think, compared to the rest of it, that stuff is trivial, right? Taking user input, managing save files, managing assets, and rendering. That's all stuff that I could do. But again, like, this is basically it. This is basically the whole game, right? Just need a way of like iterating over all the entities in the dungeon, seeing where they're located, placing them on the screen in the right spot. Which in my eyes would be pretty easy unless we're doing some like super, super fancy camera stuff. But even then, most graphics programming has been researched heavily, and so there's probably some easily accessible solutions already, and I wouldn't necessarily have to dive into all the math myself. I understand I'm using GM for my game simply because of graphics. I assume that's Game Maker. Yeah, that makes sense. I would genuinely be curious to see what would happen if you built just an empty project in Godot versus Game Maker. Like I wonder what the I wonder what the performance is like, and B, I wonder how big the files are. We could technically do that right now, because I just want to get an idea of like what exactly is being included when you create a build. I don't have Game Maker installed though. I'm just trying to think, because like both of them have their own languages. Is Game Maker language interpreted, or is it? It has to be interpreted, right? Because you can fetch the original scripts from a sort of decomp. It would make sense that it's interpreted. My first guess would be that Game Maker is better at optimizing than Godot, but I'm not sure, because both of them, because like Godot was originally meant for 2D games, and then they implemented a bunch of 3D stuff. And as far as I'm aware, Game Maker is like exclusively 2D. I'm gonna do a search for it and see if anybody knows. Just do Game Maker versus Godot. Sure, Reddit. The first suggested search that popped up was Game Maker versus Godot, Reddit. All right, let's see what this is. Looking for an engine to use at a beginner level. Start with a Game Maker. Okay, this is like... Yeah, that's not quite what I was looking for. This is beginner stuff. No, not for beginners. I just want to know what their performance is like, man. Oh, every single search is about beginners. What is this? Recently tried using Game Maker and it's a good engine. Massive component trees that Unity and Godot have are painful enough to make you nauseous, but the Game Maker editor is very comfortable and convenient. Okay. Sure. It's also easy to customize. For example, Unity's prefab doesn't exist in Game Maker, but you can implement a similar function in a few hours by using room get info, and you get a more customizable workflow. Okay, dude. Okay. The surface and matrix functions are also very easy to use, and even complex processing can be easily performed. Unity's transform can also be reproduced. The audio is easier to use than any other game engine and can be used immediately in practice. Okay, except that Will You Snail has bugs involving audio devices. Maybe that's not audio, maybe that's audio devices, but still. That might be a little bit ironic. This was also a year ago. The animation curves are also great. I think Godot just recently did some stuff with animation curves. Or maybe it was just, I don't remember. They did something with animation recently. It certainly has fewer existing tools. Okay, yeah, I don't... Spelunky was made in GameMaker. Okay. I don't know. Maybe I might be convinced here. Oh, but if you use GameMaker, don't you have to use GameMaker's language? I don't think you're allowed to use anything else, right? So that's going to be a huge no. Okay, yeah, I just... Now I'm starting to see a bunch of people say Godot is better. Man, I just don't want to... I don't want to use a full-blown engine, though. Because, again, that's going to come with a whole bunch of bells and whistles that I don't need. And, like... I guess the only other thing that I'd be worried about is compiling for different platforms. Because, like, I'd be okay compiling for Windows and Linux. I don't plan on supporting Mac because reasons. But the only other thing would be consoles. And I know nothing about that, so it might be easier to let it, so like if Godot does have functionality to easily compile for consoles, then I might just use it for that. I mean, I plan on making as much as I can in C# anyway, so it's like it should in theory be trivial if I wanted to compile for, well, I shouldn't say trivial, because again, if I roll my own asset management and renderer, then it might be a bit of a nightmare to try and transfer that over into Godot. Let me do this. Flashbang warning, sorry. What should I title this? I don't know. I'll just say to do. So I'm gonna need a renderer. Why did it not capitalize the R? Renderer. Asset manager. Compiler for console. What was the other thing that I mentioned? I thought there was like one more thing. save file manager, Steam integration. Although I hear that's not that bad. I hear Steam has pretty good tools to use. So like, this is basically just assuming that I'm handling all of the data stuff myself. So user input manager. The user input manager, Steam integration, save file manager, and maybe the asset manager I can do myself. So really the only huge things are the renderer and compiling it for console. Which I don't know, maybe compiling it for console isn't that bad. Especially since it's all in C#, which is owned by Microsoft. It might be not too terrible to get an Xbox version. Of course, that's pretty far into the future, but I just want to consider my options here, I think, before I get too far. The big thing is the rendering. I think that if I can find some library, some package, some whatever, that makes it really easy for me to just put stuff on the screen, I could potentially do that myself. I would be... Okay, I'm just going to turn that off. I would be okay with doing that myself. What else? Is there anything else that I'm missing here? What else would I need to do? Obviously, like the gameplay. But assuming that that's all done, right? I think that's it. I'm pretty sure that's it. Audio, I guess. Audio. Audio player. Which again, this may or may not be something that I can do. I can just grab a package for. Okay, so for this one, I would rather not do myself. So I'd rather find some other resource to do this for me, I think. honestly, okay, here's the order of things. I would rather find a package first, then do it myself. And if I can't do it, or if I am struggling too much, or it's taking too much effort, or whatever, then I can try and find a game engine that does it for me. Asset management, I'm okay with doing that myself. Compiler for console, definitely not going to do that myself. I'll just say package, but really that's like just whatever resources available. Save file manager, I'm perfectly fine doing that myself. Steam integration, I'll try and find a package for that. Otherwise, I'm fine with doing it myself. I'm sure there's some resources that make it very easy. I mean, they've got an SDK, right? There's just the Steam SDK. Maybe I don't even need a package. Maybe that's just do it myself, right? User input. Not sure about this one. I'll try doing it myself. And then audio player, I definitely want to find a package for that. Okay, so I've got some research to do. I need to figure out if there's a viable renderer. What does it take to make a console version, and some package to play audio for me. If I can manage to do these three things, then I can avoid having to use an engine, which I am definitely willing to do, despite the fact that I don't need to, because my game is definitely not going to be that intense in terms of resource usage. So using an engine is perfectly fine. I just don't like the idea of using such a big tool if I don't need to. Right? Because it might speed up the development process, but it's also going to add a lot of unnecessary stuff to the project. And I don't necessarily care about that. Or I don't necessarily care for the extra stuff, I should say. Okay. I think that's good, though. I think I just need to research these things, and if I can find resources, then that's good. I do need to work on Stonebot a little bit more, because there is a bug that I thought I fixed. But basically, the access token that Stonebot uses only lasts for 4 hours. It expires every 4 hours. And so you need to refresh the token every 4 hours. And I thought that I had set it up to do that automatically, but it does not do that for some reason. So that's why the past couple of streams have lasted more than 4 hours. So it doesn't happen all that much. But if a stream does go for more than 4 hours, then Stonebot just loses its permission to be connected to Twitch, and so Twitch drops it. Which, again, it should automatically refresh its credentials. I don't know why it doesn't do it, but it should. Anyway, I think we made some good progress. I was kind of expecting to run into more hiccups, but it worked out. But that's going to be it for the stream. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate everybody being here. Should we raid? Should we raid somebody? Let me see. Would recommend. A font renderer. Somebody's making a font renderer. Yeah, that's probably fine. I'll just end stream. All right. Thank you for being here. See you later. Have a good one.